This is dangerous. We had to even talk Fox into not revealing some stuff. You know why?
Wow.
Because it would get some of our agents or those of our friends put on a wall and shot. I mean, some of that stuff was that deep. So we
Wow.
all sat around and said, what does this crackhead have to offer this company? The only one thing is access to dad.
Hmm.
Big guy, big guy. And then the thing back, well, did you have a meeting? Yeah, it was a profitable meeting. We talked about so and so. Good work, son. Blah, 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 blah. And I'm just saying, we're looking at this.
Wow.
Oh, this is deep, And then I said, what do you think? He said, I could have gotten an indictment in 5 minutes in front of damn near any grand jury that I would impanel in New York. The other guy said the same thing. I said, yeah, I've been a prosecutor too, defense lawyer and a criminal court judge. This is a slam dunk on a multi-count RICO indictment for real.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's good to see you today on the Speak and See Show. Like, subscribe, click that notification button so when I get information out, you can get information in. You want to know about the Hunter Biden laptop? There are actually 3 laptops. Judge Joe Brown, he got to see them. You want to know about the impeachment of Joe Biden? Judge Joe Brown, you got to hear him. You want to know about the indictments on Donald Trump? Judge Joe Brown, we have an interview with him today, and I wanted to just say he blew my mind. If I was to describe Judge Joe Brown to you, I would describe him like this. If there was a hybrid person with a mentality, psychology of a Jordan Peterson, with the historical knowledge of, say, a Thomas Sowell, and add the photographic memory of like a John F. Kennedy and as witty and as sharp on the fly as Candace Owens, calling the plays like he sees them, I would go John Madden. I'm telling you, he has a pure heart and true love for this country, like many of you here today. That's Judge Joe Brown. I mean, I don't want to hear it again that you don't have a voice. Oh, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. Well, neither was who, but we vote this way because we don't have a voice, is what some people say. Well, here he is on a silver platter, giving them to Memphis. If Memphis doesn't vote this, if he's not a landslide win, then this country has problems. This is Judge Joe Brown. Guys, I'm going to put this video in a couple different clips because there's just way too much. This will be part 1 of the clip today, and it's going to go over a lot of things, but you're going to be so much wiser when you're done. You're going to be so much wiser about the history of what's going on and the truth and the actual law that matters in the Trump and Biden cases. Grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a popcorn. This will be part 1, and part 2 is fire. Oh gosh, I can't wait to get that out. Anyway, I'll get that out shortly. Enjoy, guys. Thanks for watching. Now, how do you feel about the elections? Are they going to be fair?
We just got some new election machines, and they were used for the November 2022 election cycle for the first time. The election machines here were hacked, and even the Justice Department put the money up 15 years ago to replace them. They got them from drug seizures, but the local yokels decided they didn't want them to be repaired. And there's an interesting thing. January 2021, after the November 2020 election cycle, when the Justice Department said there was no wrongdoing in the election, 2 days after they issued that said Memphis and Shelby County, once again, the machines were hacked, and it does not appear that there was a fair and valid election. This has been going on for 20 some years.
Wow.
So what? Memphis isn't exactly one of the smallest cities in America. It's bigger than New Orleans, Atlanta, Baltimore, all those places. But even though we had, by their own findings, significant fraud in the voting process, for America generally, that didn't happen. So
wow.
I've been in places where I have witnessed voting fraud. They have a thing in Tennessee called an official election witness. It has to be a circuit court judge who comes in as a witness to the proceedings. So several times I have been that, and Find me some votes is interesting because I said that one time too. I said, I tell you what, we've got a problem here. Somebody needs to find some votes. What had happened is some people had deliberately lost the electronic record of the voting and had a contrived paper recordation that was showing one candidate losing by 92 votes. The janitor had come up to me and another state judge and said, were we looking for a thing looked like a little bitty record that was silver? I said, yeah. And he pointed out where it was. So we said, who did that? And he
Wow.
pointed them out. We sent our bailiffs over there. And my quote, and this has been 30 years ago, 31 years ago, was, gentlemen, I think somebody needs to find some votes before Judge Swearingen and I set a bond of 250,000 apiece on each of you.
Wow.
Now, if your recollection is miraculously refreshed, then we don't have to go there. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, oh my God, it just
Wow.
slipped my mind. Yeah. So the other candidate won by 124 votes. So
Really?
yeah. So I mean, I've seen it happen. That's just one funny example.
Wow. Because I know,
But
do you know anything about the elections in Africa right now?
mm-hmm,
Burkina Faso, of course, had the coup. Mali had the coup. Gabon just had a coup. Niger just overthrew the Bazoum. And then Nigeria is also in question. Um,
mm-hmm,
but they had an election and they sent, who was it? Stacey Abrams to serve as the international observer for Nigeria. She was there. And now it's up in the court saying that it was, I mean, have you heard any? Why would they send Stacey Abrams to Nigeria to be the national observer? They're even wondering that in Nigeria.
well, you know what I find interesting? The lady down in Georgia that indicted Trump, Stacey Abrams lives in her district, and June,
Really?
Stacey Abrams was claiming the same thing happened to her in the gubernatorial elect. Hold on a second.
Right. I remember
My
that.
dog is being a little naughty. Uh, Stacey Abrams was claiming that Georgia's gubernatorial election was invalid because it was fraudulent. She basically said the same thing that Trump said, but that's all right with her saying it according to the way things go. So I think we need to pay attention to what's going on. They're running something on us. They have an old propaganda saying that if you tell a lie long enough and loud enough, you can get anyone to believe it, even the liar.
Right. Right.
What we are getting is conditioned to something.
Mm.
New Mexico's governor says she decided that the state is going to suspend the Second Amendment, but not just the Second Amendment, the First Amendment too. Now, she says insurrection is in threatened and everything. And if you notice the use of the word insurrection a lot lately,
A lot.
well, let me tell you what that's about. See, all of this unconstitutional stuff they're proposing, if it resulted in somebody being arrested, would probably result in an instant habeas corpus proceeding. That is, any judge who gets approached, you get to pick the judge in most states,
Mm-hmm.
he isn't assigned, would have to say, this person's in jail for a constitutional basis, or even if what the state said was right, you could not keep him because it's unconstitutional. It's null and void. You have to let him free.
Okay.
The Constitution says the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended except one, for invasion, and two, for insurrection. So they keep using that
Oh,
term insurrection, and that's what that woman was claiming. There's an imminent insurrection. So they give themselves superficial justification for suspending our most fundamental right, the writ
wow.
of habeas corpus, which tests everything else. No, you got him locked up. Why do you have him locked up? No, you can't lock somebody up for that.
Right, right.
So they're conditioning us to, well, it was insurrection.
Make it say it
Now,
easier. Comes
at
out
my
easier.
age, I can remember riots, protests, and stuff in DC where there were 10, 12, 15,000 people getting real rowdy.
Yeah.
180, come on. It's an insurrection. They're trying to overthrow the federal government. Now, you have an entity with the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army with M1 tanks, M2 Bradleys, and all of the 9 yards, and the Marine Corps, and 180 people are going to overthrow that. Oh, give me a break. Next bloody thing is the next item of business that was supposed to come up until Pelosi says she's declaring an emergency because of the break in of 180 people
Uh-huh.
was something known as the Confidence in Elections Act of 1877. They had a problem then, and it's still good law. It says if there is an apparent lack of public confidence in the electoral process,
Hmm.
the vice president of the United States shall decline to certify the electoral college results until a 15-member committee is appointed that shall take a minimum of 10 days to audit and recertify the election results or such extra time as is reasonably necessary. The 15-man committee is five from, or person committee is five from the House, five from the Senate, five from the U.S. Supreme Court. Chief Justice is supposed to be on that, and then two from each party. And the majority in the House gets 3 votes and minority, and same with the Senate. So that would have worked out at 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats.
Mhm.
So just that being the next
Wow.
item of business, that gets tabled. So we now get trying to get Pence to break the law by being told challenge that, but that's what the act says. The vice president shall decline to certify and call for the
Wow.
formation of the committee. That was the next item of business. So we got that decline. 1877, there have been same kind of
So
problems
that was a
alleged by the
legitimate
election chief.
so that was a legitimate response by Donald Trump then.
He's quoting you the law, but it's getting distorted by modern media into
Insurrection.
yeah. Well, let's take another thing. Bragg.
Mm.
I've been doing this a lot longer than he has, and it looks to me he's one of those type that in first year law he was all interested in business law and didn't pay any attention to constitutional or criminal law.
Mm.
He indicted Trump essentially for bribing Stormy Daniels not to embarrass him. If you have to bribe somebody to not embarrass you, what else do they call that? Blackmail.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a felony. So Bragg indicted the victim of felony blackmail.
Wow.
And then when it comes to the corporation not giving a detailed recitation of what the payout to her was about, well, it's public record. And there was a gag provision to the settlement, which is what is encouraged by American law. So if they'd been specific about what the payout was about, they would have violated the gag provision. So an entity got indicted for following the law.
Wow.
You
That
get down into Florida with the documents, And then I happen to be a judge running the moot court thing that Fox put on the end of last year with the 3 laptops Hunter had, not one, not 2, but 3. And we had the technician who worked on them. He downloaded all of them, so he had a complete copy of the whole thing. And the
Wow.
file box behind the vet is referred to quite often in the email exchanges between the vice president and his son, and about taking the people that Hunter was working with by there for a look. And you remember the mess where the Secret Service didn't want to release the names of who. Now we find out that certain entities have been by there maybe 40, 42 times. Well, the vice president isn't the president. The president, under the Constitution, as commander in chief of the military and as chief diplomat, according to the U.S. Supreme Court's dictates on quite a few occasions, has absolute, unquestioned authority to declassify anything he wishes to in any fashion he wishes to, partly or totally. He also has the authority to classify. His generals may say, we don't need to classify this. And he says, yes, we do.
Okay.
They may say this needs to be secret. And he says, no, it's going to have to be released. He's a chief diplomat. What happens? He's talking to the prime minister of England, and they're talking about something going on in the Middle East. So the president is privy to something that the CIA comes up with, and he says, hey, look, let me pull your coattail. This is what we came up with. You maybe need to know this. And the guy goes, oh, wow. See, he can declassify. The case is U.S. Department of Navy versus Egan, EGAN, 1988. There are a series of concurring opinions, but when you read them, they say the authority to classify, declassify resides in the president. It is totally unquestionable. You can't regulate it. It matches his power to pardon or commute sentence. It's that strong.
Wow.
So if he takes it out of the White House, and it also, one of the opinions says, by any means he chooses,
Mm-hmm.
and he removes it, that's partial declassification.
Mm-hmm.
The Secret Service, by the way, is guarding Malargo the same way they guard the White House. And maybe when he doesn't turn it over to the archives, 2 things are going on here. Archivist, one, he's saying, I'm not in office, but I took the oath, so I've got a continuing or fiduciary responsibility to protect the citizenry. And the archivists have not been cleared for secret access to secrets. They don't have the security clearance. Or 2, perhaps what's going on is there's evidence against somebody in the new administration, and if we turn it over, it gets destroyed, which is not in the interest of the people.
Wow.
And you see, it goes down this long laundry list. There's one other factor. It's called Marbury versus Madison, 1803 U.S. Supreme Court. If Congress passes a law saying that he has to follow their regulations, that's unconstitutional. And that case stands for the fact that even if Congress passes a law, an appellate court can hold it unconstitutional. And since it evolved a challenge to a president's act, they said 220 years ago, even if it specifically violates the dictates of Congress, if it is unconstitutional, the president has an obligation to disregard it.
Really?
So if they put any restrictions on him, they can't. Now, see,
How did the charges come up?
Yeah, well, because this is another disappointing thing. Maybe I should relapse to this. the bar associations around the country do surveys. So over the last 50 years, typically just 25% of practicing lawyers and judges have actually read the Constitution.
Really?
Right now, less than 5% sitting in a legislative body have read the Constitution they've taken an oath to uphold. They don't know what it means.
Wow.
Like, okay,
It's so big now, too.
yeah, and like let's give an example. You heard George W. Bush hollering about, we have to declare a war on terror. War on terror. How the hell are you going to declare a war on a state of mind?
Right.
Terror.
Right.
But Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says it shall be the duty of the Navy to suppress and eradicate piracy wherever found in the world and enforce the law of nations. That's a basic quote.
Okay.
Nations have had a thing against piracy since ancient Greece, the Egyptian area, the Phoenicians. Right now, we have anti-piracy controls off of East Africa, collaborating with everybody else. Now, Article 6 says a ratified treaty shall become part of the supreme law of the land. We have quite a few ratified treaties that say hijacking airplanes is piracy.
Mm-hmm.
So on 9/11, when Al Qaeda hijacks several aircraft, that becomes piracy. Article 1, Section 8 says it's the duty and responsibility without the declaration of war to suppress and eradicate piracy. So when they go after bin Laden, they're going after pirates, and the Marine Corps has that in their hymn, from the halls of Montezuma, that's during the Mexican-American War, to the shores of Tripoli when they go down there in the Mediterranean in the early 1800s and they take on the Barbary pirates.
Wow.
So all of that's set forth in Constitution, and he's grinning at everybody in the camera. We have to fight terror, and it's a war on terror. We have to do something to oppress terror. And he says it 8 or 9 times in one run-on sentence. See, that's how we get acclimated to stuff we don't know. Meanwhile, let's talk about another thing. When we're talking about criminality, that sickens me from the hypocrisy of it all. Article 6, ratified treaties shall become part of the supreme law of the land on the same level as the Constitution and laws passed to carry out the Constitution.
Mm.
What do we have? We have a 1999 treaty negotiated by then President Bill Clinton.
Mm.
It says the signatories agree to apprehend, detain, and extradite any party indicted or charged through formal legal process by the other signatory to this treaty. Who's the other signatory? Ukraine.
Oh.
So in October 2020, Ukraine's Supreme Court revealed that there was a multi-hundred-some-page organized crime indictment naming Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. So under the supreme law of the land, they're supposed to take him into custody, hold him, and extradite him back to Ukraine, which they're not going to do for diplomatic purposes. But you see, what's he going to do when this is over? And is our assistance to Ukraine legitimate, or is somebody trying to bribe his way out of a long organized crime indictment?
Wow.
And
Wow.
January 2018 or 17, I remember watching a C-SPAN thing where he was sitting at a table on stage.
I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired.
and he was joking about how he was bribing Ukraine officials to get rid of the prosecutor and get him off his son's back. And he said, yeah, I was telling them that they could kiss these $14 billion in loan guarantees goodbye if they didn't do it.
Right.
Now, Article 2 of the Section 4 of the Constitution says president or vice president can be impeached and, if convicted, removed from office for three things. One, bribery. And he admitted he was doing it, and that's what the indictment says. Multiple counts of felony bribery, extortion, solicitation of perjury, treason, etc., etc.
Wow. It's all there.
Yeah, or treason. And there's stuff in those laptops that would, without too much stretch to it, match the constitutional definition of treason. That, by the way, is the only crime designated in the Constitution and what it takes to prove it. And misdemeanors and felonies committed in office. So those are three things. And
wow,
what I was looking at on the laptop, what's in those indictments that Ukraine's Supreme Court revealed, suggests that, wow, we have somebody that's in trouble. Now, he's not vice president anymore, but the Democratic Party made a bad mistake. Remember, they went after Trump twice for impeachment proceedings. The second time, he was no longer president of the United States. So they set the precedent for being able to go after somebody for doing something in an office they no longer hold. Now, somebody's the president now and not the vice president. So when you're directing somebody in emails, have them go by the garage and take a look behind the vet in the box. And that's almost literally what some of the emails are saying.
Really?
Now, yeah, I mean, it's pretty bad. So we had a former New York City prosecutor and now eminent defense counsel being the prosecutor in this. Another gentleman with the same qualifications, and me, I've done the same thing for half century. We sat down and we looked at each other and said, you know what? This is dangerous. We had to even talk Fox into not revealing some stuff. You know why?
Wow.
Because it would get some of our agents or those of our friends put on a wall and shot. I mean, some of that stuff was that deep. So we all sat around and said, what does this crackhead have to offer this company? The only one thing is access to dad. Big guy. And then the thing back, well, did you have a meeting? Yeah, it was a profitable meeting. We talked about so-and-so. Good work, son, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just saying, we're looking at this.
Wow.
Oh, this is deep, you know. And then I said, what do you think? He said, I could have gotten an indictment in 5 minutes in front of damn near any grand jury that I would impanel in New York. The other guy said the same thing. I said, yeah, I've been a prosecutor too, defense lawyer and a criminal court judge. This is a slam dunk on a multi-count RICO indictment for real.
Wow.
In other words, the whole thing is, if you take one company, the Ukraine company that Biden Jr. or Joe Hunter was working with, their whole business is organized crime. That's RICO. If you take the Chinese entity, what they're doing, the whole thing is organized crime. And see, going after Trump in Georgia for organized crime, you get down to this. In essence, aside from some technical stuff, they're saying that if you worked with the Republican Party or you were doing politics as business, which is what everybody involved was doing, that is in of itself organized crime.
Right.
So you're saying this is an organized crime enterprise to be with the wrong political party. That's Georgia again.
Wow.
In Georgia, I downloaded all 92 pages of that so-called RICO indictment. And what's in them can be expressed by several counts she has where she says it is a criminal act to urge your followers to read or look at Newsmax.
What?
I've done that. So I guess if I
I've lost-
said that to anybody in Florida, that would be felonious activity. Like, what in the world are you doing here?
What?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the way the whole indictment reads, if you back off, is somebody disagreed with what is now the official party line. So if you disagreed with it, you should go to jail. That's essentially what they're saying.
Right. Wow. You see,
And
that's what the danger is of having you in office.
yeah, and see, here's the other thing too. Well, Trump is, I said, look, he's your Baba Yaga, your boogeyman. But I understand that. But justice is blind, it can't see. And if we did that, then we wouldn't have, oh, yeah, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and may be used in evidence against you, blah, 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 blah. Those are called what? Miranda rights.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Miranda was not a good guy.
Really?
And if we had the attitude back then, 1962, 64, that we have now, we never would have those rights articulated that way because Miranda being a bad guy, his rights are supposed to go out of the window.
Right.
Now, for my business for years as a criminal court judge, I'm sitting there, I've got a motion to suppress. Confession, alleged seizure of property on a search and seizure thing. Well, I might not like the defendant. The defendant might be a real live thug, but there are quite a few more million people in the state of Tennessee than that one guy. So if the principle applies to the millions, I can't strip them of the effect of the law because this one guy is a bad guy.
Right. Okay.
Classic example, 1994, I had a motion to suppress. They see some, it was marijuana. So, I mean, but that was illegal, still is in the state of Tennessee, but that's not the point. I'm trying to figure out how they got probable cause to search this guy's luggage. It wasn't a hit by a drug dog. They have in these x-ray machines and the machines you go through, they can pick up and read the Mylar strips and your money and tell how much you got in your pocket. So they had just installed these things and they read this guy had $3,240 some dollars in cash in his pocket. That they claimed gave them probable cause to pull his luggage and look. And I'm saying, excuse me, the regulation is if you're carrying more than 10,000 or more, right? Well, that's your honor, blah, blah, blah. And that's more of a revenue thing than anything else. But anything under 10, there's no law against it, is it?
Right.
No, sir, it's not. So, point, even though you caught this guy red-handed, you broke the law because I will be damned if this court's going to declare having lawful money in your pocket is a crime.
Right.
So your probable cause is essentially that this man was following the law, did nothing that was unlawful, had $3,240 in cash in his pocket. So that gave you a right to violate his Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. The court will not allow that. That motion will be sustained. That evidence is stricken and shall not be admissible.
Wow.
Well, they took it up on appeal and it was upheld. So, I mean,
Yeah.
See, this wasn't necessarily a good guy, but we're protecting everybody else.
Right.
You know,
Right.
just think about it. You like my brother, one of my brothers went through and he was into international security and stuff like that. And he was also a diplomat for this country. So they stopped somebody for having too much money in his pocket. So what wound up happening is they called me. I was the judge here that was on call, and I just said, I think you need to let him go because I know what's going to happen. They made a call to the consulate, and the consulate came down there and cussed the folk out literally and took a sticker and slapped it on there, said diplomatic. He should now go to hell.
What?
So walked on through, solved that.
Right.
But you see, he wasn't breaking any law. And I know the former office I was with before I became a judge 30 some years ago, they used to do a thriving business on so and so and so and so versus $4,818.27 of American currency. Whatever. The guy was going to buy plants in another city, and it was a cash transaction with some farmers. So they seize his money, and he's got 15 days to make a claim, or they will forfeit it into the government. It's like, wait a minute, what
What's happening there?
what's going on here? See, so you see these things, and maybe the guy that is making the complaint is, you know, he's a deacon in his church, been a good God-fearing man his whole life, or maybe he's a thug. But you see, I can't look at is it a thug or is it a God-fearing preacher man or deacon of his church when
Right.
I deal with it. It's blind. So people get all off into this thing that leads us down a very slippery slope,
Mm.
deep into a rabbit hole where evil Donald Trump, we got to get him out of the way. Well, yeah, but did you see what happens when you start going too far in Mexico, New Mexico, and Albuquerque,
Right.
where how many thousand people showed up armed in defiance
Mhm.
of the governor, and law enforcement said, hey, we're not going to do this. We took an oath to uphold the Constitution. You can't
Right.
come in here and on your own declare that you're going to suspend the First Amendment and the Second. You're out of your mind, lady.
Gotcha.
And see, that's
Wow.
what we have too much of, and we are becoming inured to it because we hear it over and over and over again. And the repetition convinces people that it is the law when it's not.
Right.
See, America is supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. And you can only remain free if you're brave because being free is not safe. Now,
Mm.
we have checks and balances. You have the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive.
Mm.
Then you have all three of them balancing out each other. Then you have the federal system and the state systems. They balance each other out. And there's always the remote threat of another civil war like we suffered from. All right.
Right.
The ultimate check is the citizenry. If you keep the citizens armed, then the government can't be repressive. The governor did an ass backwards stupid stunt about her going to suspend the First and Second Amendment.
Mm.
Citizens of Mexico, New Mexico said, and everybody shows up in Albuquerque. Ain't nobody going down to disarm this many armed citizens. That's power to the people.
Mm.
Now, I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't do something shady, like try to get them all indicted based on video recordations. But then that's the habeas. But then if we listen to her talk about insurrection, somebody will forget that. So
So they're
we will have to watch it.
they're desensitizing people to the Constitution.
Yeah. And then here's the thing about being free is not safe, but being free is so important that we'll take the collateral damage that goes along with being able to remain free.